4:51 a.m., Wood County, Wisconsin. Bog fog rolled across 340 acres of flooded marsh, thick enough to cut visibility to 20 feet. A line of federal vehicles sat dark on the service road behind Marsh Hollow Cooperative. Engines off, running on battery heat alone. 11 agents from FBI Milwaukee's hostage rescue element, 6 Homeland Security investigations officers, 4 Wood County tactical deputies, 21 people in the dark, waiting on a single radio call. The rear sorting shed was 40 meters ahead, steel-clad, no windows on the exterior face. A reinforced door that did not appear on any building permit filed with the county. The call came at 4:53. They moved. The federal indictment, 47 counts total, didn't start with a federal tip or a confidential informant. It started with a refrigeration technician named Dale Cussman, who noticed a pump running at the wrong time of year. That one observation, logged on a Tuesday afternoon work order in late April 2026, would unravel an operation spanning 3 states, a fraudulent agricultural recruiting network, and 81 days of confinement for 5 adult American women inside a sealed agricultural shed in the middle of a Wisconsin cranberry marsh. The trail to those 5 women begins months before the breach, with a cooperative that looked exactly like what it claimed to be. Marsh Hollow Cranberry Cooperative had operated in Wood County, Wisconsin Rapids area since the early 2000s. 340 acres of managed bog, 3 steel-clad sorting sheds, a packing plant that ran from September through December and went dark every January. On paper, it was an unremarkable mid-size cooperative, one of dozens in central Wisconsin's cranberry corridor, which produces roughly 60% of the nation's annual cranberry supply. The operation employed seasonal workers, ran standard harvest contracts, and had passed every agricultural inspection on file. The foreman of record was a man federal prosecutors now identify as Gerald Mast, 58 years old, listed in county business records as a retired equipment dealer from Wausau. Mast had managed the cooperative for 9 years. Local 4-H groups toured the marsh each October. He was known at the county zoning office, known at the equipment co-op, known by name at the Wood County Soil Conservation Office. He was also, according to the federal indictment, unsealed in June 2026, the on-site operator of a holding compound concealed inside the cooperative's rear sorting shed. The compound, if that word sounds too dramatic for a cranberry farm, the floor plan entered into federal evidence removes the doubt, occupied the interior of the rearmost structure. Original dimensions, 60 feet by 110 feet, standard agricultural storage. By the time federal agents breached it, the interior had been partitioned, exterior windows, blacked out with industrial insulation foam and sheet metal, installed from the inside. The ventilation system had been rerouted to draw from an off-grid propane generator rather than the cooperative's main electrical grid. Interior doors had been retrofitted with heavy-gauge steel slide bolts, the kind rated for livestock containment, not storage facilities. A single camera system, locally recorded, covered the interior corridor. None of these modifications appeared in any county permit record. The cooperative had a second entity operating in parallel. Court documents identify it as Harvest Bridge Agricultural Services, a limited liability company registered in Minnesota in October 2025. Harvest Bridge presented itself as a farm labor recruiting firm, operating a website and placing listings on agricultural job boards across 3 Midwest states, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa. The listings advertise seasonal positions, crop processing, packing line work, warehouse logistics, pay rates described as competitive, housing described as provided on site. The recruiter who ran Harvest Bridge is identified in the indictment as Raymond Okafor, 44 years old, an address listed in Duluth, Minnesota. Okafor had no verifiable history in agricultural labor placement. His previous business registrations in Minnesota included a dissolved logistics brokerage and a defunct food service consulting firm. Between November 2025 and January 2026, Harvest Bridge conducted recruiting outreach across online platforms. The listings were specific enough to appear legitimate. Equipment types named, harvest schedules described, cooperative name mentioned. The application process required a phone interview, a background acknowledgement form, and a travel confirmation. Applicants who progressed past the interview phase received a written offer letter on Harvest Bridge letterhead and a travel itinerary directing them to a staging address in Wisconsin Rapids. 5 women accepted those offers. Federal investigators have confirmed their ages: 24, 27, 31, 35, and 39 years old. All 5 were American citizens. All 5 had been reported missing by family members within 2 to 4 weeks of their disappearance. 1 from a town in southern Minnesota, 2 from Iowa, 2 from Wisconsin. Missing persons reports had been filed in 3 separate county jurisdictions and 1 state database. None of those reports had been cross-referenced into a pattern before the power records surfaced. All 5 arrived at the staging address believing they were beginning seasonal agricultural employment. None of them left voluntarily. Here's the part that doesn't make sense on the surface. 5 separate missing persons reports, filed across 3 states, over a span of roughly 10 weeks, and no agency connected them before a refrigeration technician flagged an anomaly on a work order. The individual reports were legitimate. The data existed. It simply sat in separate county systems that did not share a unified real-time index with federal missing adult databases. Investigators would later note that Okafor exploited this limitation deliberately, spacing the arrivals across weeks to prevent any single jurisdiction from seeing a pattern. That changed because of a pump. Dale Cussman serviced industrial refrigeration and fluid circulation systems throughout Wood County and the surrounding area. In late April 2026, he was contracted by Marsh Hollow Cooperative to perform a routine maintenance inspection on the bog circulation compressors, the pumps that manage water levels across the flooded harvest areas. Standard seasonal prep work ahead of flood irrigation, which typically begins in August ahead of the fall harvest. During the inspection, Cussman checked the electrical draw logs on the rear bog's primary circulation pump. The pump showed continuous full-load operation since mid-April. That was the anomaly. Cranberry irrigation pumps do not run in April. The irrigation season in central Wisconsin does not begin until late July at the earliest, and typically August. A pump drawing full residential scale load in mid-April, consistently, every night, 7 days a week, was not running irrigation. It was running something else. Cussman flagged it on his work order as a possible equipment malfunction or meter irregularity. He mentioned it to the cooperative's insurance auditor at the company's next billing review. The auditor, whose name has not been released, pulled the full power consumption records for the rear bog and the rear sorting shed on the same service connection. The numbers did not match any agricultural load profile. The off-season draw was consistent in timing, running from approximately 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. every night, with a secondary daytime draw consistent with a residential HVAC unit. Processing equipment runs sporadic load tied to operational hours. A nighttime heavy residential pattern draw in a supposedly vacant sorting shed in mid-April, with no harvest underway, matched one thing and one thing only: people living inside the building. The auditor walked the file to a Wood County Sheriff's investigator the same afternoon. 48 hours later, the case was on a desk at FBI Milwaukee field office. What FBI Milwaukee field supervisors understood immediately was that this was not a meter fraud case and not an equipment anomaly. The power signature, combined with the structural modifications described in the county permit records, or rather their absence from permit records, and the inactive cooperative status, produced a picture that escalated the matter within a single duty day. An HSI duty agent was looped in within hours. HSI's jurisdiction over forced labor, labor trafficking, and document fraud made the agency a natural parallel partner from the first briefing. The question federal investigators needed to answer before any tactical decision could be made was, who is inside, how many, And what is their condition? I spent time going through the court affidavit on this, and one detail kept nagging at me. The investigation had a hard clock from the moment the first agency briefing happened. Every day of surveillance was another day those women remained inside that shed. And the investigators knew it. The affidavit language reflects that pressure, not in emotional terms, but in the operational tempo. The timeline from initial FBI receipt to the warrant application is 14 days. For a federal operation of this complexity, that is fast. Surveillance was established within 72 hours of the FBI briefing. A mobile observation unit was positioned on a county road north of the property with sight lines to the service entrance and the rear shed. License plate readers captured vehicle movement at the cooperative's 2 access gates. Aerial surveillance was run twice over the first week, using a fixed-wing asset out of Milwaukee. Thermal imaging passes during nighttime hours confirmed heat signatures consistent with multiple occupants inside the rear structure. The thermal data was significant. The shed showed body heat distribution consistent with 5 to 7 individuals in a confined rear section of the structure. This aligned with later physical evidence. It did not yet tell investigators the condition of those individuals. The obstacle that complicated the investigation in its second week was straightforward and serious. The rear sorting shed had no accessible entry point other than the reinforced rear door and a secondary loading bay that had been welded shut from the inside, a fact confirmed by the aerial imagery and a ground-level inspection conducted by a Wood County deputy in civilian clothing who walked a perimeter on a public access easement adjacent to the property. Every original exterior window port had been sealed. The ventilation drew from the generator, not from any exterior duct accessible from outside. There was no way to get eyes inside, no way to conduct a noise check, no way to confirm the number or status of the occupants without a physical breach. The decision was made to proceed to a warrant application on the basis of the thermal evidence, the power anomaly, the structural modifications, the missing persons cross-reference that FBI ran across the 3 state reports, and one additional piece of evidence that surfaced in the second week of surveillance. Raymond Okafor's Harvest Bridge recruiting website was still active as of early May 2026. An FBI digital forensics unit pulled the site's registration, hosting records and back-end contact forms. Okafor's Minnesota LLC address appeared in the registration. More useful, a contact phone number listed on the site resolved to a prepaid device that had pinged a cell tower 600 meters from the Marsh Hollow Cooperative on 4 separate dates between January and April 2026. Okafor had been to the property multiple times. After the cooperative was supposed to be dark for the season, the warrant application was submitted to a federal magistrate judge in the Western District of Wisconsin on May 15, 2026. It was approved the same day. The next question was tactical: when and how to make entry without triggering a response that put the occupants at risk. Here's what most people assume about operations like this: that the breach is the straightforward part once the warrant exists. It isn't. The reinforced rear door of the Marsh Hollow shed was described in pre-breach reconnaissance as a modified cold storage entry, a steel frame, a commercial-grade lock set, and what appeared from exterior imaging to be a secondary interior brace bar. Standard HRT ballistic breach tools would penetrate it, but not cleanly and not quietly. A fast, low-noise entry was the priority. Any delay at the door gave anyone inside time to respond in ways that could endanger the occupants. The HRT element spent 4 days on entry planning. They sourced the original steel specifications for cold storage doors of that era, identified the structural weak point at the lower hinge assembly, and developed a 2-tool simultaneous breach sequence that would take the door in under 8 seconds. They rehearsed it. The secondary obstacle surfaced 48 hours before the scheduled operation. Aerial thermal imaging on the night of May 19th showed an additional heat signature at the cooperative's main vehicle gate. A person, stationary, in what appeared to be a lawn chair. An overnight watcher who had not appeared in any previous surveillance pass. The operation was postponed 24 hours. The following night, May 20th, the watcher was gone. The operation was reset for the pre-dawn window of May 21, 2026. 21 personnel, 3 separate vehicle staging points on roads adjacent to the property, positioned to prevent any exit from the cooperative's 2 access gates. A Wood County EMS unit staged 800 meters east on the county road, running dark. Entry was set for 4:53 a.m. What's most surprising about the breach, according to the tactical log entered in the federal affidavit, is how fast it resolved. The door went at 4:53 and 18 seconds. The 2-tool simultaneous sequence worked as planned. The lower hinge assembly separated and the door came forward. HRT element was inside in under 3 seconds. HSI agents followed. The interior corridor of the rear section was lit by 2 industrial work lights connected to the propane generator. The partitioned rear area, approximately 30 feet by 40 feet, had been converted to a living space, cots, a portable heating unit, a chemical toilet, and a small propane camp stove. No running water inside the partition. A single camera recorder mounted at the corridor entrance was running. Agents secured it immediately. 5 adult women were present. All 5 were alert and ambulatory. All 5 identified themselves by name when asked. Ages later confirmed as 24, 27, 31, 35, and 39. 3 had been inside the shed for the full 81 days. 2 had arrived approximately 3 weeks after the initial 3, consistent with the spacing of the missing persons reports. All 5 walked out of the structure under blanket cover within 9 minutes of the breach. They were transferred directly to the EMS unit waiting on the county road. 4 ambulances from Wood County and the adjacent county had been staged. 3 were used. All 5 women were transported to Asperis Riverview Hospital in Wisconsin Rapids for evaluation consistent with prolonged confinement protocols. Clinical documentation from the receiving unit is sealed under federal protective order, pending trial proceedings. 4 suspects were taken into custody on the property that morning. Gerald Mast was found in the main farmhouse on the north end of the cooperative. He was taken without resistance. Raymond Okafor was not on site at the time of the breach. His arrest occurred separately, at approximately 7:15 a.m., at a motel on the south end of Wisconsin Rapids, based on cell phone location data that federal investigators had been tracking under a separate court order. 2 additional individuals, a man and a woman, names withheld pending arraignment, were found in a converted office space attached to the main sorting shed. Their specific roles are described in the indictment, but have not been fully disclosed in public filings. All 4 were placed in federal custody on the morning of May 21, 2026. The cooperative's books, the off-season generator logs, the single-camera recording system recovered from the corridor, Okafor's recruiting laptop seized from his motel room, and the Harvest Bridge LLC business records are now central exhibits in a federal indictment filed in the Western District of Wisconsin. The indictment spans 47 counts, and their scope reveals something larger than just the 5 women recovered from Marsh Hollow. Federal investigators, working from Okafor's laptop and the Harvest Bridge server records subpoenaed from the Minnesota hosting company, identified a total of 19 individuals who had responded to Harvest Bridge job listings and progressed past the initial interview stage between November 2025 and March 2026. 5 were transported to Marsh Hollow. The remaining 14 either withdrew from the application process, failed to respond to the travel itinerary, or could not be reached after a certain point in the intake sequence. 3 of those 14 have not been located. Their names appear in Okafor's intake records. Their last confirmed contact with family members, per cross-referenced missing persons data, falls in a window consistent with the Harvest Bridge outreach period. The FBI's investigation has extended beyond Wood County to determine whether any secondary location associated with Harvest Bridge's network was ever established. No secondary location has been confirmed. The 3 individuals remain unaccounted for in public case filings as of June 27, 2026. Put yourself in the position of the FBI supervisors running this investigation in early May, before the breach, with the thermal signatures on the screen and those missing persons cross-references in front of them. They had enough for the warrant. They had enough for the tactical planning. What they did not have, what they could not know, was whether Marsh Hollow was the only location or one of several. That uncertainty shaped every decision. The operation had to move fast enough to secure the known location and do it in a way that generated maximum forensic yield on the communications and records, because those records might point to other sites. Every exhibit mattered. Every device, every log, every receipt. That pressure is visible in the indictment's document handling section. The forensic evidence list runs to 11 categories. Looking at what this case reveals about the infrastructure gap it exploited, it isn't complicated, which is part of what makes it striking. Harvest Bridge operated for roughly 5 months on a website, a phone number, a Minnesota LLC, and job board listings that required no verification to post. The agricultural recruiting sector has no federal licensing requirement. Anyone can register an LLC, post a job listing, and conduct remote interviews without triggering any regulatory scrutiny. The fake job lure is not a new vector. It appears in federal labor fraud and forced labor cases across decades of case history. What made Harvest Bridge functional was not sophistication. It was patience and geographic spread, spacing the lures across 3 states, keeping the listings generic enough to avoid platform flags, and targeting a labor category where remote offers and travel-to-site arrangements are normalized. We'll say what most observers won't on this. The regulatory gap that Harvest Bridge exploited has been identified in federal law enforcement reporting going back more than a decade. It has not been closed. The Harvest Bridge website was live and operational as of early May 2026, more than 3 months into the active operation at Marsh Hollow. No platform flagged it. No agricultural industry body flagged it. The woman in southern Minnesota, who filed a missing persons report for her relative in January of that year, had no mechanism to know that a job listing was the last thing her relative had clicked before disappearing. The question that sits in the middle of this case, the one worth leaving open here, is whether the system failed these women or whether there was no system to fail. The missing persons reports existed. The recruiting front was operating in the open. The gap between those two things is not a failure of one agency or one database. It is a structural feature of how agricultural labor recruitment operates without oversight, and how adult missing persons reports are processed at the county level without mandatory federal cross-referencing triggers. That is worth sitting with. The indictment charges Mast and Okafor, along with the 2 additional defendants, on counts including conspiracy to commit forced labor, document fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. The wire fraud counts relate specifically to the Harvest Bridge recruiting communications, the offer letters, the travel itineraries, the online listings, which were transmitted electronically across state lines. The document fraud counts relate to false employment agreements presented to the 5 women at intake. Sentencing guidelines under the federal forced labor statute carry maximum terms of 20 years per count. With 47 counts across 4 defendants, the potential exposure is significant. Federal prosecutors have not announced whether any plea discussions are underway. The case is scheduled for a preliminary hearing in the Western District of Wisconsin in July 2026. The off-grid generator is in federal evidence. The generator logs show continuous operation from approximately January 12, 2026, the date the first 3 women arrived at the cooperative, according to the indictment's timeline, through May 21st at 4:53 a.m., 119 days of off-grid power to a sealed sorting shed. The operation required continuous power for heat, light, and the camera system. The generator used propane, not grid electricity, because grid electricity produces a metered record visible to the insurance auditor and the county utility. The switch to propane was deliberate. What the operators did not account for was that the bog circulation pump on the same service circuit had been left on a timed operational schedule and was drawing grid electricity continuously. A configuration error that produced the anomaly Cussman flagged on his work order in late April. The criminal enterprise was designed around concealment. It was undone by a scheduling error on an irrigation pump. One detail that stuck with me when reading through the affidavit: the timing log on the pump showed it had been running on that erroneous schedule since mid-January. For roughly 3.5 months, the power anomaly existed in the data. It was visible to anyone who pulled the consumption records. The insurance auditor found it in April only because Cussman's work order mentioned it. Without that work order, the records might have sat unexamined through the summer and into the next harvest season. 3.5 months. That is how close this came to running longer. The Wood County Sheriff's Department, in a statement released after the May 21st operation, credited the coordinated federal-local response and confirmed that county deputies had provided tactical support to the federal element. Sheriff's Department personnel have not commented on the investigation's timeline or on why the 3 separate missing persons reports filed by family members in the county jurisdiction had not been cross-referenced earlier. Those questions are part of a separate administrative review described in a Wood County Board meeting agenda filed in June 2026. The 5 women recovered from Marsh Hollow were interviewed by federal investigators at Asperis Riverview Hospital beginning on May 22, 2026, the day after the breach. Their statements form a core part of the evidentiary record. Under the Federal Protective Order, the specific contents of those statements are sealed. What is public from the indictment is the recruitment timeline, the transport mechanism, personal vehicles driven by individuals connected to Harvest Bridge, routing through secondary stops before arrival at the cooperative, and the intake sequence at the facility. Their cases are being processed through Victim Witness Services in the Western District. Legal advocates assigned by the district are named in the case filings. As of June 27, 2026, the federal indictment is active. 4 defendants are in custody awaiting trial. The cooperative property has been seized under civil asset forfeiture provisions and is closed. Harvest Bridge LLC has been dissolved by court order. The website has been taken offline. 3 individuals who progressed through the Harvest Bridge application process remain unaccounted for. The FBI has not confirmed whether those 3 ever reached a physical location or whether their contact with Harvest Bridge ended at the intake stage. Their cases remain open in the federal investigation file. The cooperative's books showed a legitimate cranberry operation on the surface. Revenue from the most recent harvest season. Equipment invoices. Fuel records. Underneath those records, investigators found a second set of financial flows. Cash transfers to accounts associated with Okafor's Minnesota entities, totaling an amount described in the indictment as exceeding $180,000 over the period of the operation. The destination of those funds beyond the identified accounts has not been fully traced. Federal financial investigators have issued subpoenas to 3 additional banking institutions in 2 states. The money trail is not closed. Mast's 9 years as cooperative foreman are now part of the federal record. Investigators have found no evidence of prior criminal activity at the property. The indictment describes the Marsh Hollow scheme as having been conceived in mid-2025 and operationalized in the fall of that year, meaning the decision to convert the rear sorting shed into a holding compound was made while the cooperative was still running its final legitimate harvest season. The 2 activities ran simultaneously for part of the fall of 2025. Local agricultural contacts, industry partners, and county officials who interacted with Mast during that period are part of the ongoing witness interviews. None of them, according to available public filings, had any knowledge of what the rear shed contained. A career built on familiarity, on tour groups and handshakes, and a name that meant something in the county. That familiarity was the infrastructure. It was more durable than any lock or blackout panel. Here's the operational reality that this case leaves on the record. The Harvest Bridge scheme was not technically sophisticated. It did not require hacking, financial expertise, or specialized knowledge. It required a physical location, a cover story that had been building credibility for 9 years, a basic LLC, and job board access. The barrier to entry for this type of operation is lower than the barrier to starting a small business in most states. What stopped it was an irrigation pump running at the wrong time. Federal prosecutors will argue at trial that the 4 defendants knew exactly what they were doing and planned the operation with deliberate care. The defense teams have not yet filed detailed responses to the indictment beyond initial not guilty pleas entered in May. The preliminary hearing is scheduled. The trial date has not been set. The bog is still. The shed is locked from the outside now, a federal evidence seal on the door. The propane generator disconnected. The generator logs bagged and tagged. The Harvest Bridge website no longer resolves. The 3 missing individuals whose names appear in Okafor's intake records do not yet have answers. Will there be a part 2 to this story? Comment yes or no. Because based on what's still open in this indictment, the untraced funds, the 3 unaccounted names, the administrative review at the county level, this case is not finished. The trial hasn't started. The financial subpoenas are pending. The question of whether any additional infrastructure existed outside Wood County remains officially open in the FBI's case file as of this date. The 4 defendants are charged. The evidence is assembled. The cooperative is sealed. The Harvest Bridge recruitment listings are gone. The demand for cheap, invisible, off-the-record labor that made a fake job ad credible to 5 people looking for seasonal work, that has not been dismantled. No indictment touches that. No conviction changes it. The pump ran for 3.5 months before anyone looked at the meter.